Hello folks, my name is Ewan Haggerty. I've been interested in Stonehenge and how it was constructed and its purpose for many decades now. Now, one of the ways in which the stones at Stonehenge have been proposed to move, and here I'm using a 4 kilogram salt block as a sort of a substitute for a sarsen, is that they were put on rollers, modelled by these pencils here, and they were moved about by somehow pulling or pushing them with ropes. It works, but first of all you've got to put the stone on the rollers somehow, and then you've got a fair degree of nice rolling capability. But as soon as the block of stone gets not flat, which this salt block conveniently is, and the ground gets uneven, it stops working. The other problem that you get is that if you've got too few rollers and of the wrong type, the wood under compression just splits and you wind up with some big block of stone sat in an unstable, uneven surface, and you've got to somehow lift it up and put it down again once you've fixed the rollers. And then ropes, like this example here, which is collected from the historic dockyard at Chatham, is a fairly technological piece of kit. It's made out of a specific fibre. It can be made extraordinarily strong, but only if it is appropriately chemically treated so that it doesn't degrade and turn into mush through biological action and getting wet and stuff like that. It involves taking carefully prepared fibres, laying them nice and straight, twisting them one way and then twisting them another, and then combining them to make a cord. I'd recommend it as a visit to go, but I would invite you to not take it for granted that these ancient people had anything like rope or big grippable hawsers to move things around. So it is not a presumption that you can say they obviously had ropes grew in trees. They didn't. They're quite high technological devices. So let's step away from ropes. How might they have moved big blocks? What did they have available at the time? Well, let me just reset the block, get rid of the rollers. So there you have a sarsen block. It's just sat there on a hillside somewhere and you want to move it. Well, where you would start is by undermining the rock. So I'm just cheating here by taking a book out from underneath. But the point is that we've now got a rock which is suspended at both ends. What you could then do is, using skills they had and material they had, is to weave a big basket around the stone. Now obviously I'm just going to lift up the stone and slide this on, but you've got to imagine that they would weave it around the stone. There you go. Now I've not done anything technologically clever here. All I've done is I've taken willow or ash tree, and I have wound it around and round the stone and packed it out with other tree material. So basically, despite the fact being big and rectangular and heavy, it's now got a tyre, if you like, around it. It's a bit like one of these silly exercise machines that you get advertised by KTEL in the 1980s. But it's a rock. Now, all you need to do is lever up either end of the stone so it rests on the tyre, and the thing will roll very, very easily, and you can change its direction very, very easily. Now, I suppose one of the things you'll say, oh well, the willow, the ash or whatever it is will burst. The principal factor in making a tyre is known to be something called hoop strength. And that's the hoop of material that goes around, which is the tensile strength of the material. And ash and willow is very, very strong in tensile strength. And if it's all locked together, as in a big strong basket, it's locating against itself, so the weight of the rock and the pressure on the ground is distributed quite evenly throughout the tyre, and it won't disrupt. And even if it did, you'd be able to block up one end of your rock reasonably easy and remake the tyre once it is actually free of its original ground position. So why couldn't they have done it like this? It uses available materials, which they had in great amounts of the ash and the willow and those sorts of tree materials. They knew how to make big baskets. In fact, the big baskets, or the biggest baskets that we also know they made, were huts, which are then slathered over with mud in order to make their huts and dwellings. So this was technology they understood. Also, because it is a very natural material, it doesn't leave much trace because there's no great industry that's required to make it, unlike there would have been for if you're using anything that involved ropes. And this method of transport means that you can roll it about relatively easily under or on uneven, unprepared surfaces, so you don't need the flat surfaces that rollers would need. What sorts of archaeological signatures would persist if this was indeed the method used to move stones? Well, the way that it would probably be recognised would be that you'd have a series of pits and areas where the stones used to sit. So if I roll this back up to where it was, you might detect a trench and a kind of a ramp that actually give a landing spot for your wicker wheel to move. Another point I'd like to make is that once you have got it moving, you're actually making use of a feature of the stones, which is the length, which provides you leverage so that you can change the direction of the roll by shoving it quite easily at the edges, because the pivot point is underneath the centre of the mass of the stone. Then all you need to do is roll the thing by pushing along the middle. Anyway, that's my thoughts. Please let me know what you think.